An old man is dying. His eyes have gone dark with age. He can no longer see the faces of the people he loves. But his mind is sharp. Sharper, perhaps, than it has ever been. Two boys stand before him. One is older, one is younger. And in the world they live in, that single detail, birth order, decides everything. Inheritance, authority, legacy. The blessing of a father was not a sentimental gesture. It was destiny, spoken aloud. The father lifts his hands. And then, he does something strange. He crosses them. The right hand, the hand of power, the hand of the firstborn. He moves it away from the older boy and lays it on the head of the younger. A younger son watches this happen, and he is horrified. He reaches out to stop it. Not this hand, Father. The other one. You've made a mistake. But the old man will not move his hands. I know, my son, he whispers. I know. Why? Why would a dying patriarch deliberately reverse the natural order? Why would he cross his frail, trembling arms to place the greater blessing on the wrong child? Was this the confusion of a blind old man fumbling in the dark? Or was it something else entirely? What if it wasn't a mistake at all? What if this moment, quiet, small, hidden inside a tent in Egypt, would go on to shape the entire future of a nation? To understand why Jacob blessed Ephraim instead of Manasseh, we have to understand the man crossing his hands, because he had seen this before. He had lived this before. The land is Egypt, the time, roughly the 17th century before Christ, in the long shadow of the pyramids. Jacob is 147 years old. Picture the room. Not a palace, though his son is the second most powerful man in Egypt. Just a tent, or a modest dwelling on the edge of the fertile land of Goshen. Oil lamps flicker against woven walls. The air is thick and still. Outside, the wind moves across the desert the way it always has, indifferent to the dramas of men. Inside, a life is ending. This is not just any old man. This is Israel, the name given to him by God himself after a night of wrestling that left him limping for the rest of his life. He carries in his aging body the promises made to his grandfather Abraham, the covenant, the pledge that from this family would come a nation and a blessing for all the earth. And now those promises are about to pass to the next generation. He has spent his final years in Egypt, reunited with the son he thought was dead for 22 years. Joseph, the boy sold into slavery, the boy who rose from a prison cell to a throne room, the boy who saved the world from famine, and in doing so, saved his own family. But Jacob's story is nearly over, and a dying patriarch has one last act of tremendous power left to perform: the blessing. We have to pause here, because our modern ears don't hear this correctly. When we say blessing today, we think of a kind word, a prayer before a meal, a nice sentiment. That is not what this was. In the ancient Near East, the patriarchal blessing was a legal, spiritual, and prophetic act. When a father spoke it over his children, he was distributing the future itself. He was declaring who would lead, who would inherit, whose descendants would carry the covenant forward. The firstborn son received the birthright, a double portion of the inheritance, and the position of authority over the family. This was the natural order, the expected order, the sacred order. To reverse it was almost unthinkable. And Jacob knew this better than anyone alive, because Jacob was not the firstborn. His twin brother Esau came first. By the customs of their world, Esau should have received everything. But Jacob had spent his early life clawing for the birthright that wasn't his. He bought it from a starving Esau for a bowl of stew. And then, in the most painful chapter of his youth, he stole the blessing. Close your eyes and go back with Jacob decades earlier. His own father Isaac was old then, and blind. just as Jacob is now. Isaac had wanted to bless Esau, his favorite, the firstborn. But Jacob's mother, Rebekah, had received a word from God before the twins were even born. The older shall serve the younger. So they deceived him. Jacob covered his smooth arms in goatskin to feel like his hairy brother. He wore Esau's clothes to carry his scent. He stood before his blind father, trembling, and lied. I am Esau, your firstborn. And the blessing came out. Do you feel the echo? An old, blind father, trembling hands reaching out to identify a son by touch, a blessing passing to the younger instead of the older. Jacob had been on the other side of that moment. He knew the fear of it. He knew the weight of it. He had spent years running from a brother who wanted to kill him because of it. So now, as an old, blind man himself, when Jacob crosses his hands, he is not confused. He is remembering. He, of all people, understood that God does not always follow the order that men expect. Word reaches Joseph. Your father is failing. He takes his 2 sons and goes to him. Ephraim and Manasseh. Born in Egypt to Joseph and his Egyptian wife. Half Egyptian boys, raised in the household of a ruler, likely more familiar with the Nile than with the God of their great-grandfather Abraham. By now, they are grown. Young men, not children. Joseph brings them into that dim, sacred room, and something remarkable happens before the blessing even begins. Jacob gathers his failing strength. He sits up, and he does something no one expected. He adopts them. Ephraim and Manasseh, he says, shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Do you understand what just happened? With a single sentence, Jacob elevated his 2 grandsons to the status of his own sons. He was giving Joseph, in effect, the double portion of the firstborn. 2 tribal inheritances instead of 1. Joseph's children would not be a sub-branch of 1 tribe. They would become 2 of the tribes of Israel themselves. This is why, later, when you count the tribes, there is no tribe of Joseph. There is the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Manasseh. Joseph must have felt his heart swell. His sons, his Egyptian-born sons, grafted directly into the covenant of Israel. It was more than he could have hoped for. And then it was time for the blessing. Joseph arranged everything carefully. Joseph, ever the wise administrator, positioned his sons with precision. Manasseh, the firstborn, he placed at Jacob's right hand. Ephraim, the younger, at Jacob's left. Everything in its proper order. Everything correct. All the old man had to do was reach straight forward and lay each hand where it naturally fell. But Jacob crossed his arms. Feel the tension in that room. Joseph watches his father's frail hands rise into the air. He watches them move, not straight, but crossing. The right drifting toward the younger boy, the left toward the older. And Joseph thinks, he can't see. He's confused. He doesn't know which boy is which. The blessing begins to pour out. Jacob speaks of God, the God before whom Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who had been his shepherd all his life, the angel who redeemed him from all harm. Let my name be named on these boys, he says. Let them grow into a multitude. And Joseph can't bear it any longer. He reaches up. He takes his father's right hand to move it, gently, respectfully, from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. Not so, my father, he says. This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. And the old man, blind, dying, but utterly certain, refuses. I know, my son. I know. 3 words that carry the weight of 100 years. I know exactly what I am doing. He also shall become a people, Jacob says of Manasseh. He also shall be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. The hands do not move. The younger is placed above the older. On purpose, by a man who understood, from painful personal experience, that this was how God so often worked. Now step back from the tent, rise above the moment, and look at the whole sweep of the story, because something strange has been happening from the very beginning. Cain was the firstborn, but God favored Abel's offering. Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn, but the covenant passed to Isaac. Esau came into the world first, but the blessing went to Jacob. Reuben was Jacob's eldest, but the leadership passed to Judah and the double portion to Joseph. And now Manasseh, the elder, but the greater blessing rests on Ephraim. Later, it will happen again. A shepherd boy named David, the youngest of 8 brothers, overlooked even by his own father when the prophet came looking for a king. And God will say to that prophet the words that unlock this entire mystery. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Do you see it now? This is not random. This is not a series of accidents. This is a signature, a recurring theme written across the entire tapestry of Scripture. God does not choose the way we choose. We are impressed by what comes first, what is biggest, what is strongest, what the world has already crowned. We look at birth order and status and outward advantage, and we assume that's where greatness must live. But again and again, God reaches past the obvious choice and lays his hand on the unexpected one. Why? Perhaps because a blessing that depends on birth order is a blessing that belongs to human systems, but a blessing that overturns birth order, that can only come from God. If greatness always went to the firstborn, we could credit nature, custom, the luck of being born first. There would be nothing miraculous about it. It would simply be the machinery of the world doing what machinery does. But when the younger is chosen, when the overlooked one is lifted up, everyone is forced to ask a different question. Not who deserved this by the rules of men, but who is the God who gives it? Grace, by definition, cannot be earned by position. It is given, and there may be something even deeper here. Jacob had spent his youth grasping for the blessing, scheming, stealing, running. He had tried to seize by his own cleverness what he thought could only be taken, and it nearly destroyed him. By the end of his life, he had learned that the blessing was never his to engineer in the first place. It was God's to give. And so, in his final act, he doesn't cling to human tradition. He surrenders to divine choice. He crosses his hands not to grasp, but to release the blessing wherever God directs it. The grasping young man had finally become the trusting old one. And here is where the story reaches forward through the centuries and proves itself, because Jacob was speaking prophecy. Generations later, when the 12 tribes settled the promised land, watch what happened to Ephraim. Ephraim grew. Ephraim multiplied. Ephraim became so dominant, so central, so powerful among the northern tribes that eventually the prophets used the name Ephraim as another word for the entire northern kingdom of Israel. When you read Hosea, when you read Isaiah, and the text says Ephraim, it often means the whole northern nation, the younger brother, the one whose head should never have received the right hand. He became the greater, just as a blind old man, crossing his trembling arms in a lamplit tent in Egypt, said he would. That whispered blessing, the one Joseph tried to correct, turned out to be one of the most accurate prophecies of Israel's future ever spoken. The hands knew. So let the story turn toward you now, because you have probably felt like Manasseh. You've done everything in the right order. You showed up first. You worked hardest. You followed the rules. You stood exactly where you were supposed to stand. The right hand, the natural blessing, the reward you thought you had earned. And then life crossed its arms. The recognition went to someone else. The opportunity landed somewhere you didn't expect. The blessing seemed to skip past you and rest on the one you assumed was behind you. And it felt like a mistake. It felt like God had confused which child was which. But what if he hadn't? What if the God who reached past Cain and past Ishmael and past Esau and past Reuben, the God who lifted a shepherd boy to a throne and a younger grandson to greatness, what if that same God knows exactly where his hand is resting? And why? Manasseh was not cursed. Read the words again. He also shall be great. He was not rejected. He was simply not first. And in the economy of heaven, being second in the eyes of men is not the tragedy we fear it to be. Because God's blessings were never distributed by the order in which we arrive. They are given by the wisdom of the one who sees the end from the beginning. The lamps in that tent burned out long ago. Jacob laid down and gathered his feet into his bed, and he breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people. The old blind man who had wrestled with God and limped through 147 years finally rested. But the crossed hands remain. They remain as one of Scripture's quietest and most profound pictures of how God works. Not through the channels we expect. Not according to the rankings we assign. Not bound by the order that seems so obvious to us. He reaches. He crosses. He chooses. And often he lays his right hand exactly where the world would never think to look. So the next time you feel overlooked, the next time it seems the blessing has gone to the wrong place, the wrong person, the wrong child, remember the old man in the tent. Remember Ephraim. And remember that when the hands of God seem to move in the wrong direction, he may be whispering the very same words Jacob spoke. I know, my son. I know. If you felt something stir in you during this story, that quiet ache of being the one who was overlooked, or the strange comfort of knowing God's hand moves with purpose, then take a moment before you go. Somewhere out there is a Manasseh who needs to hear this today. Someone standing where they thought the blessing would land, wondering why it seemed to pass them by. If this story spoke to you, share it with them. It may be the very word they need, and tell us in the comments. Where in your life have you felt the hands cross? Where did the blessing go somewhere you didn't expect? And what did God teach you in that place? We read every story, and your words may be the encouragement that carries someone else through their own dark tent. If you want to keep walking through Scripture like this, not as dusty history, but as living stories that still breathe, then subscribe and stay with us. Every week, we step back inside these ancient moments to uncover the truths hidden in the shadows of the text, because the God who crossed his hands over Ephraim is still reaching toward the unexpected ones today. Perhaps even you. We'll see you in the next story.